Guys, I think we are live. If you are with us, today's topic to kick things off is talking about the rest myth. This myth of resting if you've got a herniated disc in the lower back, if you've been struggling with sciatica, this idea that resting is going to make it better. And I'm just making sure that we're all live on all the platforms, and then we will get stuck straight into it. As always, guys, before I get into this, if you have any questions, any comments, you've been struggling with your back pain or sciatica, you can always post down in the comment section. I will go through those relatively shortly. But this particular topic for today's live, hey Tara, is really about this idea that we're going to rest if we have a lower back issue. And maybe I'm not going to necessarily do my rehab, or maybe I just need to rest until I feel better. And actually taking a step back to evaluate what that even means and realize, quite honestly, the error of our ways. And so often people say, well, I'm going to rest whilst they're still going to work, whilst they're still milling around the house, while they're still doing lots of things. And really, we need to have an honest evaluation of what do I do every single day? I might have a herniated disc in the lower back. I might have sciatica going down my leg. But resting is actually doing a series of things each day, getting dressed in the morning, going downstairs, having a coffee, struggling from the lounge to the bedroom again, maybe going to the bathroom, maybe I pop out to the shop, maybe I just dose upon some painkillers and crack on. And I'm resting until I feel better, so then I can do my rehab. And we start to realize that this is a mistake. Because when we are starting our rehabilitation exercises, so the question over on TikTok of what do you recommend for sciatica, assuming we've got a herniated disc. And it's important to clarify here, you have a herniated disc. That is the injury that is causing the sciatica. Our exercises, our rehabilitation needs to consider the fact that we have an injury down here. Now, most commonly, it's going to be L4-5, which is this one to this one, and L5-S1, which is this one to this one. That is where the root cause of your injury actually is. And so what we need to understand is that when you're resting at home doing things on a daily basis and you're in pain, you're having flare-ups, you don't feel like doing any rehab or any exercises, you have to realize that when you struggle to get out of bed, or when you move from one place to the other, get off the toilet seat and you feel that sciatica go down your leg, you have to understand one thing very clearly. You are moving the area. That is when you go from being in a position of relative discomfort to relatively more discomfort. Some of you might actually not be in pain, but the moment you go to move in one direction or another, all of a sudden you get a jolt of pain, and then you're left there throbbing for a few minutes afterwards, or maybe longer, right? And that is because this section that was injured had movement go through it. And that is the aggravation. So in the first instance, when you are practicing your exercises, your rehabilitation, assuming it's the right sort of stuff, you are learning to correct this. You are learning to protect this. You are learning to move correctly. Kev has said here, I cannot sit. Of course, if you've got a lower back injury, you have an injury to a structure that is load bearing. So when you sit down and you try and put more strain through the lumbar spine, because sitting puts anywhere from 40 to 90% more load through the lumbar spine, it hurts more. Kev's also said, I had an injection. What does the injection do for the herniated disc or the injury in your lower back? It does precisely nothing at all for the injury. And so you haven't done anything to help the injury. The injury is still there. And if you still don't have an ability to stabilize and protect this area of the lumbar spine, you're going to struggle to actually get any resolution, because you're still going to move from one position to the other in a way that allows this to move, bend, or twist, and then you're going to aggravate the underlying injury. So when we start doing our exercises, things like the dead bug, the marching bridge, the squat, the hip hinge, the step up, every single one of these exercises in a different way will require you to stabilize the lumbar spine. KG says, I have back pain at L5-S1. You have an injury at the lower back. And lower back 132 says, should I hip hinge in an extreme flare-up? You are already. If you're in an extreme flare-up, this is the real point that I'm trying to get across to you guys. If you're in an extreme flare-up during that day, you're not going to just be in bed the whole time. You're going to roll from one side to the other. You're going to get out of bed at some point sooner or later, right? You're going to move and go, oh gosh, it hurts. You are moving every day. The point is, you are doing things every single day. And so devoting some time to starting to learn how to perform the exercises correctly is what we need to do. And the exercises are a means of us learning how to protect this lumbar spine. So if it's the dead bug, we might be learning to engage our core lying on the bed because we're struggling to get out of bed. If it's something like the hip hinge, you might be stood against the wall like so, just practicing that movement of engaging and then just getting that hip hinge, right? Or you might be practicing next to something for support, right? And then practicing the hip hinge, just running your hands down your thighs a little bit, just a very, very slight movement, not that much at all, right? Because the action of you getting out of the bed was more than what I just demonstrated. And so when you start doing exercises in a lot of people's mind is like, oh, that's something that's strenuous, that's physically strenuous. The exercises should not be strenuous. And the reason we choose those individual exercises is because everybody can adjust the difficulty of the exercise to their starting point. And too often, you will be starting at a level that is higher than you can do. If you're there going and doing your squats like this, right? That's not good. But would you believe that people will come in, even in clinic, in front of me while they're less than 6 feet away, and I say, do a squat, and they go like that, and I go, goodness gracious me, that's shocking, right? Why would you go that low? That's not appropriate technique. You're rounding your lower back. Well, no wonder it hurts. Learning this is really, really important. I'm just going to skip through some of the comments just quickly to have a look, because I know there's quite a few that are coming in this morning. Rebecca says, this is so helpful and contrary to everything my physio has told me. Unfortunately for you guys, a lot of the time the physio is there to help you with your back pain, and they have a very rudimentary understanding of this stuff. For starters, they're trying to help you with your back pain. That's the mistake in the first instance, rather than your back injury. And as we've explored many times before, if there are questions on it, I might go into this in more detail today. But when you focus on the back pain, when you try and get relief for the back symptoms, it can unfortunately lead you to do things that are actually counterproductive for the underlying problem. If we understand we've got an injury, let's think about how might the knee hug or the child's pose or just twisting a little bit help protect the injury? It doesn't. If we've got an injury of vulnerable tissue, how does stretching make it stronger or more protected? It doesn't. We need stability to be provided, and we need the tools to do that and develop that ability rather than just wiggling and twisting it more. M. Hoper says, when I rest, I feel so much worse. After a session, I'm ready to go. Yes, now some people, because there is a relatively low level of competence in the musculature, a low level of strength in the musculature, passive strength, right? They find that actually even doing a rehab routine every day, the little pump that you get in the muscles after practicing these movements, after doing your rehabilitation work, the little pump actually creates a little bit of extra stiffness that's residual after the workout, which is protective, and it actually feels nice. And you find that actually, once you've done your exercise, you actually feel better afterwards because you've got a little bit more support, right? Some of you guys who've worked out in the past will have this on the different end of the spectrum, right? Where you finish doing your heavy squats and you almost feel like you're a bit stuck because there's such a pump in the muscles, right? And that's maybe a little bit extreme, but for the person that's very, very weak and vulnerable, because they have no strength, that little bit of pump actually creates a little bit of stiffness that is protective of the lumbar spine. It stops you going like that because you don't even feel like you can. So it protects you in that regard. Obviously, the stiffness is the protective role of that stiffness. It's temporary, right? We don't want to confuse, because sometimes this is lost. The spine can bend and twist, right? I will demonstrate, right? I can go down here and I can do this and touch something down there, and I can bend down and I can go down and do you can bend the spine and twist it, right? I'm using that as, but when you've got an injury, the same rules don't apply. The same rules don't apply. I'll come back to the topic for today. I'm just going to skim through some of these comments. Got here, I have reached a 6-month era from when the nightmare started. Obviously referencing the back pain from the earlier comment, right? Yes, 6 months sounds like a long time if you're in it, right? 6 weeks does, and so does 6 years. And we've been recommended B12. Please explain how B12 makes this stronger, right? Now, you might be deficient in B12, and I don't make the statement that might be a helpful supplement. Supplements don't fix your back pain. Everybody wants to take a pill nowadays to fix a problem. We have a weakness here, right? It's like trying to take a pill to get the renovation done on the back on the extension of your house. You can't take a pill for that. It needs hard work. Hard work needs to be put in. Now, the problem is that will rub some of you guys up the wrong way, because you'll be like, I have been doing hard work. Sorry, we've been doing the wrong stuff. That's just the way it is, right? If you've just been trying to bend and twist, that's a problem. And we've got a good comment here. It says, know what helps is physical therapy and a chiropractor and getting movement. The physiotherapist and the chiropractor are moving more, are all about moving more. None of that is about providing stability. That's not to say that these things can't be helpful. We need to learn to provide stability. And again, on cue, this is the problem. It's a recurring theme. Rebecca said here, are there any stretches you'd advise for the glutes, for example, which are not prejudicial to the recovery? We're always looking for stretches. Everybody wants a stretch. Why? Because you feel stiff and tense, you feel uncomfortable, you feel sore. Stretching is not what you need going forwards. Yes, we can do simple rudimentary glute, hamstring, and hip flexor stretches. You need stability. You need to learn to protect this area. You need to be able to do movements like the hip hinge, for example, with a neutral spine without rounding and bending over. To repeat, there is a big difference. If you watch my lower back here, and I move the chair out of the way, that is a hip hinge, right? That is a back bend. Most of you guys that are struggling, whenever you move, will habitually go like that, as opposed to like that. Huge difference on the way in which that is going to strain specific areas of the lumbar spine. Massive difference. This is one of the reasons why I be talking. I would encourage any of you guys that have been struggling for anything longer than a couple of weeks with your lower back issue, which basically will be a lot of you guys commenting, do the tape test for your lumbar spine. Get some ordinary packing tape. This is not special tape. It's not expensive, right? You might even have some lying around the house, right? The brown stuff, right? The brown packing tape or normal sellotape, the clear stuff, doesn't really matter. Brown stuff's a little bit better because it's a little less stretchy. And you take about 4 to 6 inches and you stick it along your back. You find the two bony bits. There's a video on the website on how to do this, right? You find the two bony bits at the base of your spine. You stick the tape there while you're stood with good posture. Then just do stuff around the house, right? For reference, the bony bits are here. That is not where your lumbar spine starts. You come up about 1 inch and then you stick the tape along here with you stood upright. Then you just go and do stuff around the house. You will realize how many times that tape tries to pull off your back, showing just how frequently you're constantly bending the lumbar spine in one direction or other, even when you think you're not. You are. Just looking through some more of the comments here. Cauda equina, laminectomy, permanent sciatic nerve damage, any suggestions? Do what you can on the rehabilitation work, providing you've been given the all clear with regards to the cauda equina. If you have any emergency symptoms, guys, you're at the wrong place, right? You need to go and get them dealt with. Consult, go and see someone if you've got those red flags, the saddle anesthesia, the numbness, the loss of bladder and bowel control. You need to go and get that seen to. Now, that's not to say that you might not then be discharged with no help whatsoever, but you do need to get it at least seen to first. Those are red flags, right? We don't mess about with those. Thankfully, they are extremely rare, right? But then we need to get on with the rehabilitation work. What else have we got in here? The orthopedic said I have degenerative disc disease and there is no cure. That's all he said. I would probably see a different orthopedic surgeon because that one sounds like they're a little bit rubbish, right? You can have, and I think the term disease on the end of degenerative disc disease is really an incorrect term to use. It makes it sound like it's, you know, something that's going to be infectious, going to spread or something like that. It's great that we haven't got more significant damage in the spine and more overt herniation, and seeing exactly what that means on the MRI is so helpful, because sometimes you'll get told you've got degenerative disc disease and you see the disc is just a bit grayed out on the MRI, right? It's dehydrated, it's got that element of degeneration to it, but it's not the same as when the disc is completely gone and there's basically no disc left there. Seeing that is quite important. But irrespective of whether it is the former or the latter, do the rehab work. If you do the rehab work and you improve your control over that section of the lower back, you build the load tolerance of that area, you will get better. You will find your symptoms improve. Paula says, after a fusion operation 6 years ago, I've got really bad pain, lower back pain, L5S1, bending, twisting, sharp pain. Yes, because when you bend and twist and move in different directions, especially if we've had a fusion at a specific section of the lumbar spine, when you are bending and twisting and moving in all sorts of directions, you are straining the thing that is injured. That's akin to saying, I sprained my left ankle. When I hop on my left ankle, it hurts. Yes, because you keep on straining the tissues. You need to learn to stabilize the lumbar spine. And someone said, could my discs be so far gone for PT that PT won't work? What you're doing in your physical therapy or physiotherapy makes the world of difference. Some of you guys will go to physical therapy and you get some massage work done, some other bits and pieces done. Some of you might go and the physical therapist or physiotherapist might use some treatments like the spinal decompression tables, etc. Some of you, they might go through exercises. Some of you, it's just a chat. The specifics of what you're doing make a difference. But I will say there is no one that will not benefit from doing proper spinal rehabilitation work. Right? If you have got the most severe case of lower back pain, that you've had the surgery and something come back, do you need to do rehab? Yes. If you've got a minor case for the very first time with a little bit of back discomfort, do you need to do rehab? Yes. And everyone in between that, improving the status quo of your lumbar spine is going to improve your health and well-being and is going to be of benefit to you in some way. How far that goes, we only know in retrospect once the job is done. It might be easier for some of you than others. The cue is that if it's harder for you to do the exercises like those I mentioned, the dead bug, the marching bridge, the squat, the hip hinge, the step up, if you try those and you can't do them very well, or you try the single leg and you can't do them very well, you're not very good at them, that is absolutely fantastic, because you clearly suck at something that a human being should be able to do and can learn how to do. It's just a case of doing the work now to learn how to do it. Right? The great thing about spine stability exercise is that the test is the exercise. And if you can't perform the exercise, you try an easier version. And if you still can't do that, you try an easier version still. You have some people that are in the program that start off their squats and they are literally like this. Move the chair out of the way again. They are literally, that's a squat. That's all they're doing. But they have realized now that they can control their spine to about here. If they go any lower, they start doing funny things and things start to hurt. So that's their starting point. Too often, and this kind of ties back into the comment earlier, the subject matter of today, too often you will feel pressure to perform a squat a certain way when you're doing your rehab and you're trying to do a squat that you don't have the competence to do. And that causes aggravation. That causes you to work out too hard. That causes you to have an irritation. And then you think, well, the squat's not for me. And it's like, I've got news for you. The squat is not for you. You won't get through a day in your life without doing a squat of some description. So you've got a choice now. You can either learn how to perform the squat, for example, in a way that does not tax the spine inappropriately, or you can continue to wing it. And too many people continue to wing it because that conversation is never even had. Just going through some more of the comments over here. Guys, you can keep posting them in the comment section. I'll get to them as best I can. Someone asked you a physician. No, I'm an osteopath. What else have we got here? Good day from the Canadian Rockies. Awesome, Jay. That's cool. You said muscles adapt faster than discs. So how can we know when our discs are ready to progress the hip hinge or any other rehab exercises? That is a great question because it demonstrates a little bit of misunderstanding. You do not wait until you feel better to progress your rehab. You progress your rehab, and the progress through the rehab demonstrates the healing. So for example, if I go and try and do a squat and I can only bear 5 kilos or maybe even just 5 pounds, and this is too much for me to do on the squat, I can feel the loading. It creates aggravation. It's too much for me. I'm not capable. Now, how do I know what the weakest link is here? It's probably going to be on the muscles and coordination, but it might be the spine. It might be that even me just picking this up, it feels too heavy. In which case, I know that the moment I go to pick it up, oh gosh, that's hurting. Okay, I'll put it down. I'm not going to do that. I'll just hold a towel and do it instead, right? But the reality is that you're going to make progress with this. And as you progress over time, if you find that you're doing a weight or a load that is creating aggravation, you take a step back and you say, well, when precisely is it creating aggravation? Is it the moment I hold the thing? If I get my other half to pass it to me, does that immediately cause pain? By and large, the answer to that question is no, by and large. Now, there will be a weight that someone could hand you that could immediately cause you pain, fair enough. But the thing to bear in mind here is that most of you guys will sit at one point or other during the day, which means the average adult, and I remember this because we've just done a big video that's coming out probably next week, maybe this week. Absolutely, really, really good one. But if you are the average 75 kilo person, man or woman, you've got anywhere from, I think it was 13 to 32 kilos of extra load going through your lumbar spine when you sit down. So you might be sitting there going, oh, well, you know, how do I know my discs can bear it? Well, if you're sat on the side of the bed, you've got anywhere from 40 to 90% extra load going through your lumbar spine. And so you're not crumbling onto the floor in that scenario. Now, you might be limited in how long you can sit there, but you still do it anyway. So chances are the 5 kilo dumbbell is probably not straining the disc in a significant way. Now, the question is, if you get to a point where you lose control while you're performing the squat and you start doing this, then you will really strain the disc. That's going to massively magnify the load on that disc, and that might cause an aggravation, right? But you're not supposed to do that because you're trying to do it properly, right? But as you go from doing 5 kilos to 10 kilos, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, etc., 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 make no mistake, your disc has got stronger. Your spine has got stronger. The muscles have got stronger. It becomes self-evident. If you knew you couldn't squat with 15 kilos before, and now you can squat with 25, and it's not aggravating you, things have gotten stronger. It's just it's a self-fulfilling prophecy as you go through that. T.R. Kinley says, a lot of the advice is for weak and elderly, but some of us are overworking pre-injury. If anything, it's been a challenge to rest more. Yeah, it might well be a challenge. That doesn't, just because we were overworking though and busy, doesn't mean you're necessarily strong. We discussed that, I think, the other week on the live session. This conflation between being busy, active, etc., and actually being strong. Strong is very easy to verify. You just give someone a weight and say, can you actually bear that load and perform, for example, a squat or hip hinge? Very, very easy way of evaluating our strength. And there might be a small period of technical skill development before you can test that effectively, but very easy to measure the strength of an individual. Ter says, when I rest, all my symptoms go silent and I start every day fresh. Awesome. And during the day, they return with needles and pins of varying degrees. Again, that's fantastic that things are settling down enough overnight. But that's a great example of the things that you're doing every day are putting stress and strain on your lower back. They're aggravating you. Thankfully, you're able to settle it down overnight. That's great news, right? But you need to be focusing on actually doing the rehabilitation so that you improve your robustness. You improve your ability to protect the spine, so you're not aggravating the spine each and every day. As you make progress with your rehabilitation exercises, you will find that the aggravation that you experience during the day occurs later and later, if at all. I put the hip hinge into my daily routine, big change for the better. Because most of the time, when you start sincerely learning these things, just learning the movements, Dave, osteopath, just learning the movements themselves actually improves your skill, right? If you go and actually practice doing a hip hinge like so, as opposed to bending, and you sincerely get that into your mind so that it becomes a subconscious pattern, you're less likely, when you go to reach for something, to go like that and flare everything up, right? Because that, I've rounded my lower back. And Dave, I would say there are good chiropractors and bad chiropractors, and they're the same with osteopaths, they're the same with all professions. I think I'm not a big fan of roasting professions, because at the end of the day, there are lots of them that help lots of people, and there are also lots that are not so good as well, right? You could say the same about, name your profession, and there are going to be good and bad people that you could roast, I suppose. And those that you could look up to and say, do you know what, that person's doing a great job. So be mindful of that. S. Balder says, any tips for rehab for an annular fissure at L4-5? Everything we've been talking about is going to be helpful. Focusing on spine stability. That is the most important thing we can do. Learn to protect that area. And I want to just clarify a point here. People often have this misunderstanding around spinal fissures or spinal tearing, that kind of stuff. Right? If you have a disc bulge, you must, or a disc herniation, the annulus fibrosis will be damaged in some way. Now, whether that is categorized as a fissure, as a tear, as a strain, that's all fine. We've got the injury there, and that is what we need to focus on. And Dave, I think you're taking an uncharitable view of things with regards to the chiropractors saying it's quackery and Scientology. I'm not a chiropractor, but that's a very uninformed opinion. I don't think that's appropriate. Anyway, guys, please keep it positive, right? Everybody here, right, who's struggling might have had good or bad experiences with different professions, whether it's an osteopath, whether it's a surgeon, whether it's this, that, the other. Let's try and keep it civil in the comments, though, please. Kyla says, how come some people don't get sciatica with a slipped disc? Because it's not hitting the right nerves. It's not irritating the right nerves. Now, for some individuals, when they have their disc bulge or herniation, they're hitting just on the right spot, in just the right way. And they are if we take this nerve, right, this one here, maybe it's the L4-5 nerve, L5-S1 nerve, okay? If the disc just happens to be coming out, hitting that nerve, and compressing it, I'll try and get my face out of the way, compressing it against that bony wall, right, squashing it there, boom, you might get those symptoms. In other scenarios, there might be a tremendous amount of inflammation around that injury, and it's filling this hole where the nerve comes out and creating a lot of pressure and irritation of the nerve. Then we might get symptoms that go down the leg. But equally, there's a lot of space here. When you look, right, when you guys look on the MRI, some of you will have seen the MRI, and you see the bundles of cauda equina, right? These are fundamentally, they come from the cauda equina, right? The lumbar spine, we think of the spinal cord, it stops around L1-2, right? This is called the conus. You'll often see references saying conus terminates at L2, or conus terminates at L1-2 region. And that's where the spinal cord technically finishes. And then the rest is just these nerves, they just come off like spaghetti, and they go down, and then they exit at various points. You can see that here. Right? But you see, there's a lot of space in the spinal canal. There is a large amount of space where these nerves are going through. And even when they come out to the side, there is a good amount of space. And so with a smaller herniation, I would say with most bulges or herniations, it's unlikely that the disc is literally hitting and compressing that nerve against the wall. Many more of you say things like, I've got sciatica. I quite clearly have the symptoms going down the leg. And I had an MRI, and they said I've got a disc bulge or herniation, but it's not hitting the nerve. Why? And they said it's not sciatica. And it's like, well, quite clearly it is. You have the sciatica is a symptom. It's not a condition. And so to King's comment, I don't know if this is relevant to the sciatica or not, but sciatica doesn't heal on its own because sciatica is not a condition. It's not an injury. The injury, like the herniated disc that Kyla's talking about, is the injury. And you have to understand very clearly, this should be euphoric almost for most of you guys that have been struggling for a long period of time. You don't have to think. Your body is healing every single day. That's the good news. The bad news is if you've been struggling, you've been interfering with the healing process every single day, which is why you're having the flare-ups, right? Your flare-ups are constantly picking the scab. Your body heals every single day. If you've got a graze on the surface of your cheek or your wrist or whatever it may be, right? Back of your hand, you don't have to think to make it heal. It happens on its own. It happens on its own. Healing is automatic. Thank goodness that it's automatic, that we don't have to think about it, right? It's not like the renovation that we've got planned in our house, for example, okay? We have to think about that. We have to do that, maybe. Maybe we get someone else to do it. I don't know. Healing happens on its own. The problem with lower back issues is that so often we are interfering with that healing and recovery process by doing things that are constantly aggravating the tissues that are trying to heal. I leaned one way and boom, the sciatica shot down my leg because I strained the joint and it created more inflammation and a bit of a reflexive muscle spasm, which made things worse. Wax Me ATZ has says, opinion on L5-S1 bulging and torn disc rehabilitation. Focus on stabilizing the spine. You need to protect that area so that it is not constantly being aggravated. You do that effectively, you're going to start to make some progress. Kuromi says, I've been told I have sciatica, chronic back pain, and mechanical S1 joint pain. That sounds like a bit of a garbled diagnosis, I'm afraid. What you've got, maybe to clarify a little bit more, is that you have an injury, it sounds as though, to the L5-S1. S1 is not a joint, S1 is a vertebra. So what they might be suggesting is that you have an injury to the L5-S1. Well, good news, because basically most people that have lower back issues and sciatica have an injury to either L4, L5 or L5-S1. So you're in good company in that regard. And that is resulting in chronic lower back pain because it's been going on for a chronic duration, a long period of time, and maybe some sciatic symptoms down the leg. That would be a better way of phrasing what we've got because it explains what it is. An injury at the lumbar spine that is giving rise to symptoms of the problem, right? The symptoms that we experience on a daily basis. Kings says, doctor said the process is not healing. It's just the spine bones are accommodating the disc prolapse. Doctor is incorrect there. It quite clearly is healing when you go through a process. Now, you might be interrupting the healing process, but the bones are not accommodating the disc prolapse. The disc prolapse is an injury. The injury will go through a healing process. It will go through and lay down scar tissue, etc. And over time, if you do the rehabilitation work, it'll go through a strengthening process. The bones are not accommodating anything. That's definitely a scenario where the person has tried their best to maybe communicate things, but they're maybe not as gifted at being able to communicate the technical process that's taking place into layperson speak. And Khadija Ali here says, can a person heal from severe sciatica? Many of you are making this mistake. Can a person heal from back pain? No. Can a person heal from sciatica? No. Because you're not talking about something that heals. Can a person heal from a cut on the surface of their skin? Can a person heal from a herniated disc? Can a person heal from an injury to the back? Yes. Can a person heal from tingling in their big toe? No. That's not what heals. The injury heals, so the symptoms resolve, right? So can a person's sciatica get better? Yes, if the injury is allowed to heal. If we support the healing of the injury that is causing the symptom, if we support that with effective rehabilitation work, then we will heal, yes. Fanoff says, I've been following your rehab program with the 5 core exercises, so that's all the free stuff online, and it's helped so much. That's awesome. Thank you very much for sharing. I appreciate that. Fan of flowers, right? We know that a lot of you guys, if you just had a bit of education and we stop making some of these mistakes that I've discussed, vis-a-vis, for example, the sciatica, trying to heal sciatica, right? And a little bit of education, a little bit of guidance, you can do so well. We get so many messages from so many people on the social medias. They say, hey, I just saw your core 5, or I watched one of the live sessions, or I've seen some of the videos that you've got online, and I did it on my own, and I actually managed to get better. That's fantastic. There are many of you that try that, and there are some of you that need a little bit more help. And there is the program, of course. Many of you guys know that anyway. But it's so cool to see some of you guys, just the value of education in the space of lower back issues cannot be overstated, because you have to live with this every day. It's not like other injuries where you can be taken out of the equation. Romian says, can you help me understand why hypermobility may be affecting your lower back? Because you have an injury, and when we have an injury, we have a loss of stability, generally speaking, right? Because you've injured the structures that provide stability and integrity to the joint. If you have hypermobility, you inherently have a little bit more mobility in the region. Often, and this is not always, but often, individuals that have hypermobility are the kind of individuals that have gravitated to things like yoga and Pilates and stretchy, bendy stuff, right? They tend to shy away from strengthening work. The hypermobility means that you're at a little bit more of a disadvantage in the early stages of recovery in your ability to provide stability to the region. And so you need to work a bit harder in that regard. It doesn't mean you can't get better. In fact, to the contrary, if you do the right stability work, you start to learn how to stabilize the spine. You progress on with the exercises. I'll repeat them for those of you that have been with us the whole life. The dead bug, the marching bridge, the squat, the hip hinge, the step up, the single leg hip hinge. If you progress on with those exercises and build back in strength, which is what provides stability to this region, then your hypermobility, provided it's not to the point where you've got shoulders dislocating all over the place, right? Because some people have very severe versions of these conditions. Providing we've just got a little bit more flexibility, right, is what we mean by hypermobility, even if it's formally diagnosed as hypermobility. That will actually be an asset for you in the long term. If you build good strength, your increased levels of baseline mobility will actually be an asset, but you have to build the strength first. And sometimes that can be a little bit of a tough pill to swallow when you're struggling, when you're in the early stages of recovery. Edward Munier says, I'm suffering with sciatic symptoms, which flares up the most when I sit down in a chair. What advice would you offer for a seating position? And what is happening to my spine when I sit? So you've got symptoms of sciatica, which are generated from an injury in the lower part of the lumbar spine. When you sit down, you put anywhere from 40 to 90% more load through the lumbar spine. So it would be akin to saying, I have a sprained ankle. When I hop on it, it hurts. Sorry, putting more load through the injured tissue is going to invariably be problematic and provoking. You're going to find, like many, many people, that sitting for durations of time create aggravation of the symptoms. Yes, you can try and sit in a better position. Yes, we can try and get a more neutral spine. Yes, we can try and make our thighs slope away rather than being curled up like this. Yes, we can do all of that, perch on the edge of the chair. But standing is going to be better. It's going to put less load through you, less increased load. Lying down is going to be better still because you've got much less load through the lumbar spine. But fundamentally, you need to work to build strength and stability back into the spine. You do that Through your rehabilitation exercises. You do that through your squats and hip hinges as the primary ones, right? The squats and the hip hinges are the safest because once you've learned the technique, you've really only got loading to worry about. So once you've learned how to, for example, perform the squat like so with good form without the spine bending, and this is aggravation free on 5 kilos, I can very reliably go from 5 to 6 and know that all I've done is increase the loading on 6 by 1 kilo. And then I go from 6 to 16 to 20 to 30 and so on and so forth. And then I know I've verifiably increased the loading in my lumbar spine. But if, for example, in Edward's case, he cannot squat with a 5 kilo weight without creating aggravation, and he weighs something like me, for example, I weigh 95 kilos or thereabouts. If Edward's worried about using a 5 kilo weight on a squat, but he's picking up his toddler, who maybe weighs 12 to 15, and he's sitting down, when he's sitting down, he's putting anywhere from 20 to 45 kilos of extra load through the lumbar spine. So if we're worried about picking up a 5 kilo squat and then going sitting down, we've got a problem. We need to learn how to do the rehabilitation work. Very, very important. Rebecca says, do you advise any form of impact activity against any form? Yeah, I don't think it's smart to be doing jumping and leaping and bounding when you've got a back injury. Recover the back injury first, and then we can get back into doing all manner of different things. Fundamentally, right, and there are examples of members with things like spondylolisthesis. I've got examples of people that I train with in jiu-jitsu. The reason I use that as an example is because jiu-jitsu is like, it's a wrestling, it's pretty strenuous, right? You're going to struggle to get something that's going to be arguably more strenuous, more provocative, more risky than jiu-jitsu. And I use that as an example that even in those scenarios, I can think of a couple of people in my immediate kind of vicinity that have had things like significant herniated discs that are back training, wrestling, right, fundamentally, that are back competing after surgery. If you do the rehab work and you build your resilience back up after a back injury, whatever it is, fundamentally, you can pretty much do what you want. The question is, what do you want to do and how much strength and resilience might be required to get to that point? And we start that off with building up our baseline tolerance for load. The safest way to do that is going to be through a squat or a hip hinge. Either or, right? I would suggest try both because they will challenge you at different times in different ways. And once you've done that, you can then look at the activities that you want to get back into. If you only want to walk up and down the garden carrying a watering hose and maybe picking up some bags of compost, which might weigh 15, 20 kilos, then you've got a figure to aim for. If you're worried about picking up 5 kilos and doing a squat, what are you thinking? Going to the garden center and picking up a 20 kilo bag of compost. That's not clever, right? And it's also inconsistent. We can't be worried about one and doing the other regardless, right? And picking up the compost off the floor is much more of a problem, right? Especially if we're only squatting, say, for example, halfway. And I use it to just go on over and over again, back to that concept of people think they're resting when they're not doing their rehab. You're not. You're doing things every single day. Edward, if you need more help, check out the program. He said that's exactly the issue. I will get on with the squats and hip workout. But the most important thing when you start doing your back rehabilitation work is that you focus on technique. You don't go and do silly things. You don't want people that go, oh, well, I'll just go to the gym. No. Focus on technique first. When you're starting these things, for example, in phase 1 of the program, you should be focusing on a technical application of the movement and doing it correctly, not physically challenging yourself. Emily says here, my disc herniation is inferior. I'm not sure what we mean by that. It might mean going down. My physio told me to stop the dead bugs, but I do have good control and no pain doing so. Don't know what their explanation for stopping the dead bugs would be. It'd be interesting to hear what they'd say. Is the treadmill or rowing machine helpful or harmful? It seems the rowing machine helps. So this is a great example. This is why education is so important, right? So what are we doing when we're doing the treadmill versus the rowing machine? Now I'm going to assume we're doing flat on the treadmill because if you're doing an incline, I don't know what, no, just don't do incline. What are you doing when you're rowing? Sitting down, number one, you're already doing plenty of sitting down and bending forwards. I don't want to be unclear about this. Doing knee hugs and child's pose for many of you feels nice. So doing something that repeatedly is doing a knee hugs and child pose will often feel nice. I don't know why I'm gesturing there like you guys can see. That's just where the comments are, right? Doing knee hugs and child's pose are going to feel nice. Does it feel nice if I just do this? Yes, it feels nice. It's a nice stretch. Repeatedly doing that, not a good idea. repeatedly just going like this, forwards and backwards, is not going to be helpful if you have a lower back injury. As nice as it might feel, you are just constantly flexing the same injured segment over and over again. And it feels nice when you're doing it, primarily because, gosh, that spine is all over the shop. If you have inflammation in your lower back, if you have an injury, you're going to have inflammation in the lower back, right? Because that's a normal response to injury, right? Injury and inflammation fills this little hole. It is a bony hole. So when you go and bend forwards, it increases the space, which decreases the pressure, which feels nice. That's why your knee hugs and child's pose feel nice. That's why doing something like rowing might well feel nice, providing you don't row too hard, right? If you push yourself too hard, then you'll catch yourself out and then boom, we're in a lot of trouble. But other than that, you're just irritating the area at a low grade way. It's not helpful. Leave it out. Think about things that maintain a neutral spine. And if you say, I'll tell you no. Oh yeah, but I'm sitting and keeping my spine neutral. No, you're not. No, you're not. No, you're not. We're not. I know building, so Rebecca says, I know building strength is important, but is there any form of cardio that you would specifically advise against? Is it okay to cycle or spin class, for example? We've got to think about these things. So exactly, Rebecca, I hope you've managed to answer that question yourself based on what I've just said. What position are we in when we're cycling? We are on the bike, like so. Cycling. Some of you guys might notice I have an assault bike here. Very different from many different ways. I can go into that if you guys have a specific question. No, why do we need to do cycling? The average adult spends 9.5 hours a day sitting. Why do you need to do your cardio sitting as well? And I'll be honest with you, forget about cardio. Just forget about cardio, right? Because it's just a distraction. Do your rehab work. Make progress on the rehab. Realistically speaking, like, if you've got enough time to worry about doing extra cardio, why are you not putting more effort and energy into the rehabilitation work? Because if you focus on getting yourself to what we would call phase 4, right, where you're doing a reasonable amount of load on the squat and hip hinge, firstly, that should be, at that point, that would be a workout for you anyway. Get to that level, and then we can start adding in cardio. Sure, we had one of the members, fantastic. She got back into doing park run, 5Ks, under 30 minutes as well. Fantastic, right? You can get back into that. But we're looking at being healthy for not the next 6 months or 6 weeks. We're looking at being healthy for the rest of our lives. What is devoting a month or two to actually really getting this stuff right, 100%, and then going back to your other things that you want to do for your health and well-being and feeding those in and creating a nice little structure? I'd suggest focus on the most important thing rather than trying to juggle things. Come back to the comments on YouTube in a second. Got an Instagram. I've got 2 bulging discs at L4-5. I'm so weak, lots of pain. Did you say rowing is okay? No, rowing is not okay. Do your rehab work, right? If you're weak, rowing is not going to get you stronger. Do proper spine stability rehab, stuff that teaches you how to control and protect this spine, the L4-5, right? And I'm assuming maybe L5-S1 is the other disc we've got injured. And then build the strength in your ability to protect that area. Jasmine said, is there a way to pick up my toddler if I've got an annular tear? With difficulty is the answer. Because what will often happen, Jasmine, this is a great example because there's so many of you guys that are parents of young kids that have a lower back injury and you can't quit that job, right? It's the hardest job, I would argue. Being a parent of a young child with a back injury is the hardest job because you can't quit that. You've always got to put them first. And there's no way around that. And so you've got to be honest with yourself, right? I always get very frustrated when someone who is a parent of a young child says, I'm not doing anything and my back pain keeps flaring up. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm a parent too. You're not doing nothing, right? You're doing stuff every day. If you're not acknowledging that, you're going to drive yourself mad because you think you're doing nothing when you're actually not. There is a very clear explanation, right, for why you're struggling because you have to do that all the time. That recognition that you're not broken, that you've got a bit more of a challenge is really important for your mind, for your outlook. If you're there like there's no reason for me to have flare-ups, then you're going to drive yourself you're going to really get into a dark place mentally. But the moment you go, oh, that makes sense why I'm struggling so much, it almost feels like the burden is lifted in so many ways. So if your squat is currently like this and your hip hinge is currently like this and you have a toddler that you have to pick up like this, that's a problem. So what do? The best you can and focus on what you can control. Focusing on what you can't control is not going to be helpful for you up here or down there. So make sure you commit to doing the rehab work. Work diligently at it in the hours of the day that you can, and do the best you can in those scenarios where you have to do things that are not ideal. for the lumbar spine. That's the adult answer. I wish I could say there was another answer, but there's not. Just looking through some of the other comments here. Glad I asked. I'm glad you asked too, Greenie. And Dat Cat, thank you. Watching your videos helped me so much, L5S1. Awesome. I appreciate that. Just going over some of the comments over here. I have a herniated disc at L5S1. I've been limping for 5 months on the waiting list for a neurosurgeon. Led to believe this may not help. Can I heal? Your body is trying to heal. Christine, your body is trying to heal, but you've been given no guidance whatsoever. So for 5 months, you've just been unwittingly making it worse, right? Quite honestly. You've been trying to avoid making it worse, but you don't have any guidance because no one's given you any education. And so you're probably still doing things like knee hugs. You maybe tried some of the twists of the spine, and you may be following along with the stuff like Get It Moving. Guys, I went on the NHS website. I did it a couple of live sessions ago, and I shared the screen with you. And one of the stretches, maybe Christine might have been given this one, you know, from a local website resource for the NHS, right? I kid you not. This was one of the stretches for people with sciatica. Like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? That's the, like, if that's the advice, no wonder you're struggling, because you've not been given any guidance. Hopefully some of the stuff we're talking about here has been helpful. And a lot of the McKenzie stuff, seeing as it's going on in the chat over here, I don't necessarily think the McKenzie stuff is helpful either. You're not explain, and those of you guys that, you know, have those things to hand, explain to me which part of McKenzie is building strength, resilience, or teaching you how to protect the lumbar spine. It's, generally speaking, it's just telling you to go in the direction that feels okay. That can trip you up. That can really trip you up. Because like I said earlier, knee hugs and child's pose often feel okay. Often they feel nice, right? You have to look for something that is rebuilding strength and resilience of your lumbar spine. The goal of the program should be around the resilience of the tissues, not of your pain. Because if you prioritize the tissues and their resilience, as they get stronger, the pain will go away. If you prioritize the pain, some of you guys have been doing McKenzie bending, twisting, stretching, all that kind of stuff. It's like, how many cobras do you have to do before your back gets stronger, healthier, more resilient? I don't know. Maybe it's like episode 721 or rep number 5,372, right? There's no conceivable mechanism for that to rebuild your back. It's just going to move it a bit more. And Tala has says, any tips for anterior pelvic tilt? Yes, ignore the fact that you got told it. Pretend you never got told it. And I appreciate that's a bit of a provocative answer. So I'll go through that, and then I'm going to go through some more of the comments on YouTube. Too many well-meaning physios or osteos or chiros, maybe doctors as well, will tell you you've got anterior pelvic tilt based on a physical examination. We've done a good couple of live sessions with you guys where we've shared x-rays of members. And you start to see, why are we looking at anterior pelvic tilt? Because when we look at anterior pelvic tilt, we're looking at the degree to which the lumbar spine is sat on a slope or not, right? If it's like this, you can see that there's a lot of shearing because the lumbar spine is trying to fall off the lumbar spine. Equally, if we like this, then it doesn't have any shock absorption, right? It's too flat. It's just compressing everything. So we're designed to have a nice, smooth little curve. And so we look at anterior pelvic tilt to see the degree of the pelvis, to see the base that the lumbar spine is sat on the sacrum, really. That's what we're interested in. Is it aligned correctly? Okay. You can't see anything from the physical. And often, if someone's talking about your bum sticking out and your lower back seam deep and your tummy sticking out, they're demonstrating that they don't understand what they're really talking about. That is not a measurement of your lumbar spine curvature. That is not a measurement of your anterior pelvic tilt. And sometimes the positions of these bony bits that they might be talking about can be off. There are certain developmental relationships between the sacrum and the hip joints that are not considered when you start talking about those kind of things. So the important thing is, if you have a lower back injury, or if you're a human being with a spine, which is basically every one of you watching the video, whether your spine is good or not, you know, that's open to debate. Assume you have normal alignment. Assume you have a normal lordosis. Assume you have normal degree of pelvic tilt. Assume you are capable of standing in a normal way and that everything is normal because you are a human being. You have 2 arms, 2 hands, etc., etc. Unless you have measured evidence to suggest to the contrary, for example, you've had some x-rays done and it actually shows you have an anterior pelvic tilt and it's tilted to the degree of an extra, 23%, great, then you can act on it. But if we're just acting on physical examinations, we're often tying ourselves in knots. And we use this specific example when we were doing Maya's x-rays a couple of weeks back. And I asked her on the live session, and you guys can go back and check it out. It's on the YouTube channel. I said, have you been told you've got anterior pelvic tilt? She said, yes, frequently. I've been told I've got anterior pelvic tilt many times. She did not have anterior pelvic tilt. She had posterior pelvic tilt, measurable. On the imaging, we could see that clearly. We could also see clearly on the imaging, which was really cool, why one might be forgiven for thinking she had anterior pelvic tilt. And if you're not aware of the illusions that can be created from the surface, then you're ignorant to those things. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are. So it's understandable that people might tell you that you've got anterior pelvic tilt, but it's also understandable that they are wrong. And Tundra, yes, you don't treat imaging, but imaging can inform the process. People say you don't treat the man, you treat the scan. Rather, you don't treat the scan, you treat the man. You inverted it there, right? But we're being silly if we don't think the scan has information that can be helpful in better understanding the individual. In that particular case, not considering the imaging is actually the mistake, right? Not considering the imaging is actually a mistake in that case, because we are assuming things which we can confirm on a scan, but we're assuming by going, oh, treat the man, not the scan. Oh, well, I think the man has anterior pelvic tilt. Based on what? Based on my looking at the man and getting him to bend and stuff. So, okay, well, you're wrong, because it can actually be verified. In that case, you are using the scan quite importantly. Gaz says, is a decompression machine good for, I assume, lower back issues? Yes, there's one behind that curtain. I think it was the last live session, I actually pulled the curtain up, showed you guys the machine in the back. But you can go on the website, you can have a look at it. Coming over to YouTube. What have we got here? How do you know what weight you should be able to hip hinge before you should start stretching, etc.? Yes, we talk about 75% being a good figure, but you do stretching. You do stretching as part of the rehabilitation program, right? If you're struggling, and guys, if you are struggling and there's lots and lots of questions and lots of concerns and you don't really know what you're doing, right? Check out the program. There is a link. It's backinshapeprogram.com. Go and have a look at the website. Those of you guys that are on TikTok or on Instagram, you can just send us a DM and we'll send you a direct link. That will give you the structure to help you guys. In fact, I think I've got it up on here, right? Just to reference. Let's see if this works. Oh, wow, it actually did. This is the website, right? This is phase 1. Okay. We have a dashboard here when you log in, say your name and stuff. You've got phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. You've got the core relief work. That's stretching, right? In each of these individual videos, you have strategy videos. How should you actually be doing what you're doing, right? Then what are you actually doing? Tutorials. Then the live routines. What you actually need to do, the full workout, right? The full thing that you're actually supposed to be doing. The same for all of the other phases. They're all video, by the way. You've got the members area where people can post comments, questions, videos, all that kind of stuff. Someone got this cool adaptation for the kettlebell or the dumbbell, right? Share videos, images, etc. There is a full program there. So if you are struggling, go and check it out. What else have we got in here? Miso, how do you feel about sleeping on your stomach? I feel I have a pretty large curve in my back. Sleeping on my stomach is the only way I can fall asleep. So again, perfect comment with regards to the anterior pelvic tilt. Generally, anterior pelvic tilt tied into the hyperlordosis. Hyperlordosis means you have an increase in lumbar curve. If someone's saying you've got a hyperlordosis, then they need to qualify it with precisely how much, right? 25% increase, 10% increase. If it's 5% increase, that's not an increase, right? That's just normal variation within a human being, an acceptable variation. But sleeping on your front, I would argue, is actually much better for the lower back, especially if it's comfortable. It's much better for the lower back, I would argue, than sleeping on your back. Primarily because you tend to allow the spine to support itself into a lordosis. Because you spend, as I said, the average adult spends 9.5 hours a day sitting. Well, you spend 9.5 hours a day flattening your lumbar spine. If you sleep on your tummy, you might spend 6 to 8 hours like that. Well, that wouldn't be a bad idea, would it? It would create perhaps a degree of balance, right? The only problem is sleeping on your front is terrible for your neck because your neck's twisted to the side. I say this is a front sleeper. So, the most important thing is that we sleep. And Tundra, no, it's not terrible for the lordosis. It's actually very good for the lordosis. Sleeping on the back is actually bad for the lordosis because you tend to flatten the lumbar spine out. James said, last week I had a consultation with a sports and spinal osteo. Awesome. You have to give us an update on how that was, James. Kinetisense assessment. Interesting. Reshma says, will radiofrequency ablation help with pain? Struggling for 2 years. Probably mean annular tears instead of annual. Annular tears, herniation, osteoporosis, etc. I would be extremely cautious about going down those kind of treatments, Reshma. You're not doing anything to strengthen and rehabilitate the lumbar spine. You know, none of that is rehabilitation work. None of that is building strength and resilience. You need to do the rehab work. I remember one specific comment from a lady, I think she was from Australia, something like Silver Fox Lady or something like that was her name on TikTok. And she was due to have one of those procedures. And she started doing the work that we talked about just from following the TikTok stuff, right? Everything we talked about to you guys, and avoided having that procedure. We get that all the time with like standard injections, but radiofrequency ablation is a little bit more of a, you know, it's a step up there. Do you know what I mean? It's not something that we take on lightly, but we have to appreciate, what the most important thing you guys need to ask your prescribing physician, surgeon, whoever it is, what is this doing to help the tissues that I have that are injured get stronger, healthier, more resilient? That's the question you need to ask. And if they say, oh, well, it's not doing anything, that's a problem, right? Okay, well, if we're going to do that procedure, what else are we doing that is going to address the strengthening, right? Someone said, how can I stop SI joint pain at night? Nothing helps, pillows, etc. MRI says the spine is more curved. It's probably a lower back issue rather than the SIJ issue. SIJs tend to be a second order problem of a lower back injury or lower back issue. Your SIJ hardly moves. The only people that really have primary SIJ issues, so sacroiliac joints, that's the joint between the orange and the white here on either side. The only people that actually have SIJ issues as the primary problem are pregnant ladies, right? Because you release a lot of relaxin. It relaxes the ligaments for obvious reasons, right? And so if you're not a pregnant lady, you've got a lower back issue. And generally speaking, the SIJ issues are normally diagnosed after your back injury. Like we tried, so basically we went to someone, they said it was our lower back. We tried a lot of stuff, it didn't work. And then they said, oh, well, it wasn't actually lower back, it was your SIJ. It's like, no, you just didn't do the right stuff for dealing with the lower back issue. And now we've got a lumbosacral region issue, right? So the lumbar spine and the SIJs. Because you can't do anything to the SIJ. What I mean by that is you can't move your left SIJ. It moves by 1 or 2 degrees, if that, depending on the individual, depending on the age, depending on any degenerative change. It hardly moves. Now, you're a pregnant lady, it's different, right? Kat E says, my SIJ issue started with pregnancy 19 years ago, right? She has heads as well, related to connective tissue, I believe. But most of you will not have a primary SIJ issue. And so, and even if you do, right, everything we talk about for creating stability in this region also provides stability to the SIJs, right? If you try and lift stuff with a flexed lumbar spine, you relatively disengage the sacroiliac joint compared to if you're stood with a neutral spine. So if you try and lift stuff like this, you're gonna create more strain on the SIJ because it's not integrated correctly. The SIJ is designed when we are in a neutral upright position, it's locked in place. When we get into a really bended, curled up position, it creates a little bit more give. Again, 1 to 2 degrees of movement, not a lot, but a little bit. And so if you're doing pelvic tucks all the time to engage your core, and then you're doing that while you're standing up, you're creating problems for yourself. And yes, you could actually create a bit of irritation of the SIJ, but that's a consequence of you dealing with the lower back issue badly, rather than the SIJ being the primary issue. Again, generally speaking, yeah, sure, there are exceptions to these things, but as general rules, these are pretty good points to lean on. Bart says, just came back from the gym doing some Bosu ball squats. I wonder what you think of Thai massage and when the back, lower back, L45 feels tight. I don't know what you were doing with regards to Bosu ball squats. I hope you're not doing Bosu ball squats on the actual Bosu ball. What we probably mean, I'm going to make an assumption here, is the ball's behind us and we're squatting up and down as if we're doing a wall squat. I think that's a bad idea. Don't think that's helpful for back injuries. We have to remember why we are doing our rehabilitation work in the first instance, guys. And we're getting towards the end of today's live session. So if you've got any more questions, post them in the comments. I'll go through them and then we'll wrap it up. This is really important. that you understand is you are not doing rehab for the sake of doing rehab and filling 20 minutes of your day. If we take the squat example specifically, because it's been mentioned, and compare it to doing a wall squat, a wall sit, or a Bosu ball squat where the wall's behind you and you're sliding up and down the wall, we are doing the squat for a number of different reasons. But one of the important reasons is because we do squats every day. So we need to be able to perform the movement of squatting from a technical point of view with precision and with coordination so that we don't think about it. And so if we're always doing our squats like so, when it comes to sitting in chairs, that's why I've left the chair behind me, I'm very coordinated at being able to do this without bending and doing all of that kind of stuff, right? I get rid of that habit, all that bending and twisting. That's why it hurts when you get out of bed, out of the chair. And so if I'm doing a wall sit, a wall squat, I'll move this out of the way. If I remove the wall, so I've got the ball behind me and I'm going up and down. If I remove the wall, I fall over. A wall squat has no applicability to daily life. The reason we're doing the squat is so that we can make immediate improvements to the way in which we do the squatting that we do every day from day one. That's why people often find when they start sincerely approaching spine stability exercises and the appropriate education, they make significant improvements in the degree to which they are flaring themselves up on a daily basis, because they're actually engaging with the process and they're learning something that then they apply to everyday life, right? And that's really important, that application of everyday life. You can learn the exercises and not apply them to everyday life, and then you're just making life harder for yourself because you're missing out on a very valuable benefit. But doing things like the Bosu ball against the wall, and I've made an assumption here, so I'm sorry if I'm incorrect there, but right? I was. He says I'm actually standing on the Bosu ball. Well, that's a very good level of coordination, right? But we should focus a little bit more on standing on the floor and putting the bar on our back and doing something that's a bit more challenging from a stability point of view. Because yes, okay, there's that balance, but you can get that from other exercises that aren't quite as high risk. But going back to the exercises, the purpose of us doing the exercise is to make us safer on the rest of the 16 to 18 hours a day. We're not just focused on that 20 minutes. That 20 minutes that we're doing our workout is so that we can learn skills that we take with us for the rest of the 18 hours of the day, 16 hours of the day that we're awake. Because that's where the flare-ups happen. That's where the irritation happens. And so we're not just doing it to do the exercise, we're doing it to make us better every single day. Uncle Charlie says, how do you feel about keto carnivore diet? And what do you eat the whole day? I think you need to prioritize protein. We discussed this on the last session, right? You do whatever you want. Eat healthy, real, whole food. Food that you can name. So if you want to eat an avocado, eat an avocado. If you want to eat a steak, eat a steak. You should be able to name the thing that you're eating. That's a general good rule, right? You start having laundry lists or shopping lists of ingredients on the back of the pack, you're probably eating something that's not necessarily going to be as reliably good, right? Whole, real, healthy food is probably the best way to go. But prioritize protein, because you guys are trying to do two things. You're trying to heal. The stuff that you are trying to heal is derived from protein, the collagenous tissues, the ligaments that make up the annulus fibrosis, etc. And you're trying to improve the quality, health, amount of muscle tissue that you have. Both of those require protein. So you should prioritize protein. Then whatever you want to do from a keto, carnivore style, paleo, whatever it is, get the other stuff on board afterwards as well. Make sure you're not in a terrible calorific deficit. Guys, just overran. We're going to wrap it up there. Hopefully that has been helpful for you guys. If you need more help and you're over on TikTok or you're over on Instagram, send us a DM. We'll send you a link, right? We'll send you a link to the program. If you're over on YouTube, I'll post it in the notes afterwards. But backinshapeprogram.com is where to go. Those of you guys that are members of the program, we're there to help you in the members area. You guys know that. So post your questions, your updates, your videos in there. We'll help you guys in there. And we will be back. We're doing 3 live sessions on the bounce today. We're going to be back tomorrow and then Thursday. So if you need any more help, want to join us again, please do. Thanks to all of you guys that joined, and we'll see you guys next time.